Well, it is the end of Friday, and I've successfully avoided charting all week long. I figured let's avoid it a little bit longer. So one thing I'm most avoidant of, and let's do some live. Let's talk about trauma because it's come up a lot this week. Trauma, and you're hearing it all over the place. You have been for years, maybe even longer, decades. Trauma, 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 trauma. A lot of people don't know what trauma really is. So we're gonna go. Hold on. See the corner? Bugs me. Hold on. I got that picture in Africa. How cool is that? I think it cost like $15. It was like a long time ago. Okay, I digress. Here we go. Trauma. Think of when you get hurt. Let's say you broke your arm. That is physical trauma. There's a difference between physical trauma and emotional trauma. In the diagnostic manual for statistical, I don't know, the DSM-5 is a big long acronym name for it. The emotional trauma didn't come around until 1980. 1980s. It comes from PTSD. They started observing from the Vietnam War that these veterans are coming back having some emotional disturbance. So they finally coined this idea of emotional trauma with PTSD. Now, just like your arm can break and can be mended with appropriate care, emotional trauma is the same way. And by the way, if someone comes and smacks my arm with enough force, it'll break. How about this? If somebody else with a different arm gets smacked with the same amount of force, it might not break. So just like physical trauma depends on who it's happening with, because of bone structure and density and genetics and that kind of thing. Same with emotional trauma. What's emotionally traumatic for one person might not be emotionally traumatic for the other person. So that's something to keep in mind. People, I think, hear somebody's story or narrative, schema, belief system of something they believe is traumatic, and then they think, well, that happened to me. I must have trauma, right? I have trauma. Not necessarily. You might have been hit on the arm with the same amount of force as somebody else, same situation, but it might not have had the same amount of emotional damage. Here, the brain, the whole thing the brain does is try to keep us safe, right? Oh, I gotta be safe. I want to live. I want to continue on, and exist, kind of thing. Keep us safe. Keep us safe. The brain's trying to keep us safe. So, gosh, I kind of forgot where I was going. It's Friday. That's Friday. Where was I going with this? I've been down this road before. I'll just keep talking about it. Emotional trauma. Brains are trying to keep us safe. What was that? Let's see. What's traumatic for you might not be traumatic for somebody else. So, God, I really don't know where I was going with that. That's okay. Here we are. Emotional trauma might not be the same for one person as another person, but it is the same to heal it if you have some kind of emotional trauma. Here's what people don't talk about on the YouTubes and whatnot. They all talk about emotional trauma. They all have this awareness. I've got all this awareness. It doesn't do any good though. It's like, hey, I'm driving down the road and my car tire explodes. I can be aware that my car tire has exploded. That's awareness is fine now, but it doesn't do me any good if I don't know how to fix it. So let's talk about fixing emotional trauma. Ready? And by the way, the brain does want to fix emotional trauma. Doesn't like having this broken arm not mended. Emotional trauma analogy wise. So in order to fix it, you have to figure out how you are actually safe from the experience that created the emotional trauma in the first place. So let's say we got one person watching. If that person, if they can, has a trauma, let's do it. We'll talk about how to heal that trauma right now. If you have a trauma, or hey, I wonder how I could heal this emotional trauma. You can lay it out. If you don't, I'm just going to make something up and it'll explain it that way. You have 10 seconds. You have five. I'll just make something up. I don't see any comments. And that might be because I don't have comments really allowed. I don't know how to do this whole, I don't even know if this is really live. But anyway, emotional trauma. The brain, trauma is only trauma if brain is still afraid of it. It's if you're stuck on some level in that processing or development. So if it's say let's say you got spanked. I got spanked and I was a kid and emotional trauma was awful. And I can't get over it. What we would do is in order to repair that, is we would go back, we'd talk about it, process the emotions that you might have had with it, and then restructure a belief system that's more empowering, maybe what you learned. But you do have to address the emotions that happened during the trauma. So inner child work is great. EMDR, also a great tool to do this. But you can also watch the movies. Watch the movies. Anytime you're feeling some kind of heightened emotion, maybe you start crying in a movie or something like that, ask yourself, what might this have to do with me? What might this have to do with me? And when you do that, it's kind of giving your brain permission and some direction on going back and figuring out what that emotion, a heightened emotion that you're having, might be connected with. And then now that it's connected, it'll be able to process it better. It won't be so, compartmentalized. Won't be back there all hidden. It'll have some light on it finally. So sometimes you can resolve trauma just by connecting what you're feeling to what that might be. And movies are a great way for that. Music, also another way. Whenever you're feeling any kind of heightened emotion of, tears or maybe getting just goosebumps listening to something, just ask yourself, what might this have to do with me? Where have what's one that gets me? Like Rudy, right? I don't know if you've seen Rudy, but it's like a football movie where the underdog kind of gets some acceptance, really. So I feel a lot of I connect with this movie. Probably because I might not have had a lot of, people rooting for me, so to speak, growing up. Didn't feel it. They might have been rooting for me, but my perspective wasn't seeing it. So now I'm watching this movie and I'm connecting this emotion I've had, repressed, all back there. It's connecting with this movie. So that's a good way to start processing this because the brain does want to heal and it'll use all these different ways to try to heal, but it'll help to say, what might this have to do with me? Where have I felt this? If Rudy is the underdog, where might I have been the underdog where I perceived it that way? So that's trauma, This isn't rocket science. We can figure this out, and it's not elusive. Just because you have awareness around a flat tire or AKA emotional trauma doesn't mean that that's a good thing. You know what I mean? Hey, it's much more secure feeling and less anxiety provoking knowing that I know how to change this flat tire, versus I just know what a flat tire looks like now, which is basically what everybody's talking about online. Hey, we're going to give you awareness around what a flat tire looks like, but they don't talk about how to fix it. So it leaves people almost in a more vulnerable position, oh my gosh, now I know all this stuff, but I have no idea how to resolve it. So here's this video, 9 minutes long. I'm going to end. It's a little after 5. I've got to get going, and I might have a few more charts to do. So I'm going to end, but I hope this was helpful. And if this is your first time watching, I'm glad you're here. Hope you learned something. And until next time, awareness up.